My family gave me only $7,000 while they spent $200,000 on my siblings. Now they all abandoned them, and I'm their only hope. But the irony is brutal. I'm 27 years old. I work in construction and have my own business now. And I need to tell this story because what happened with my family basically taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you are the ones who fail you the most. And honestly, I don't know if I'll ever completely get over it, but at least now I understand that I wasn't crazy, that things really were as unfair as I felt they were. I guess I should start from the beginning, or from when I was a kid. I always felt like there was something weird about how my parents treated me compared to my siblings, but when you're a child, you don't know how to put those things into words. You know what I mean? You just feel like something isn't right, but you think maybe it's you. Maybe you're being dramatic or exaggerating. My older sister Allison was always like the star of the family, the perfect one, the one who got the best grades and ended up going to an Ivy League university. You know, one of those that costs like a kidney and a half. Justin, my younger brother, was also the favorite, like the golden child who could do whatever he wanted. And then there's Ashley, the baby of the family, the youngest, and you can imagine she didn't lack for anything either. I was in the middle of all that, or well, technically I'm the second oldest, but I always felt like the forgotten one, the one nobody looked at. When I was like 15 or 16, Allison was about to graduate from college, and I remember my parents talked all the time about how proud they were, how they were going to help her with grad school if she wanted to do one, how they had money set aside for her future. I was struggling with math in high school at that time, and when I asked for help with a tutor, my dad told me it wasn't necessary, that I just needed to try harder. I don't know. Like there was always an excuse for why they deserved things, and I didn't. When I graduated from high school, I didn't even consider going to college. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew there was no way my parents were going to pay for something like that, and I didn't want to be in debt for the next 20 years of my life. So I went to work in construction. Started from the bottom, carrying things, cleaning, doing whatever was necessary. My parents kind of shrugged when I told them, okay, if that's what you want. They didn't even try to convince me to keep studying or offer me help. It was just like, well, it's your decision. Things continued like that for years. I worked, paid rent in an apartment that honestly was kind of ugly, but it was what I could afford. And I watched from afar as my siblings had this completely different life. Allison got married when I was like 23, and I remember the wedding was at this super fancy place with like 200 guests and everything decorated with expensive flowers and lights and I don't know what else. I went, obviously, because she's my sister. But the whole time I felt out of place, like everyone there in their expensive suits and me with the only suit I had that I'd bought on sale 3 years before. What I didn't know at that time, and what I found out later, is that my parents literally paid for the entire wedding. And when I say entire, I mean entire. It wasn't like they put in a part and the groom's parents put in another part. No. My parents paid the $200,000 that wedding cost. And me there thinking it was normal, that that's how things were done, that maybe I would also have that help when I got married someday. But anyway, let's move forward a bit. Justin decided to do grad school. I think when I was like 25. He got into a business program or something like that. I don't remember exactly what, but it was one of those expensive programs at a private university. And guess what? My parents paid for everything. The full tuition, plus his rent because the program was in another city, plus money for food and expenses. Justin basically lived 2 years without worrying about anything while he did his master's or whatever it was. Ashley, the youngest, went to college too. She took out student loans like most people, but when she graduated, my parents paid off all the debt. All of it. Like she came out of college without owing a single cent, while I watched my friends drowning in debts of $50,000 or more for the next 20 years. And me, what did I get? Well, when I started in construction and was trying to learn more about the trade, I needed my own tools. I asked my dad if he could help me buy them, and he gave me $7,000. Which, don't get me wrong, I appreciated at the time, like it was money I needed, and it helped me. But $7,000 compared to the $200,000 they gave Allison just for her wedding, not counting everything else they paid for her before. $7,000. While Justin lived 2 years, free, doing his grad school. $7,000 while Ashley came out of college debt-free. For a long time, I didn't know the exact numbers. I just had this feeling that things weren't equal. But like 2 years ago, everything exploded. It was at a family dinner, one of those gatherings where we're all supposed to be happy and get along and act like we're the perfect family. We were all there, my parents, my 3 siblings, and me, eating I don't know what thing my mom had cooked, and the conversation somehow got to the topic of money and expenses. Allison was talking about how she and her husband had just bought a new house, and she mentioned something about how the wedding had given them a good push to start their life together without debts. Justin commented that, thanks to not having to worry about rent during his grad school, he could focus completely on his studies and get a good job afterward. Ashley said something about how amazing it was not to have to pay student loans like all her friends. And me sitting there, listening to all that, feeling how something inside me was starting to boil. It wasn't the first time I'd heard comments like that, but something in that moment, maybe the casual way everyone talked about the help they'd received, like it was the most normal thing in the world, made me snap. I told them, like without thinking much about how it sounded, "You guys know you basically had everything handed to you on a silver platter, right?" The table went silent, and everyone turned to look at me like I'd said the worst curse word in the world. My mom asked me what I meant by that, and I let it all out. I told them that while the 3 of them received hundreds of thousands of dollars in help, I got $7,000 and was basically sent to figure it out on my own. Allison immediately got defensive, saying that a wedding is different, that it's an investment in a couple's future. Justin said that his grad school was for his career, that it was important. Ashley argued that everyone takes out student loans and that it was normal for parents to help. And my parents just sat there without saying anything, like looking at each other as if waiting for the other to say something. I told them it wasn't about whether a wedding or grad school or whatever was important or not. It was about there being a ridiculous difference in how they treated me compared to them. That I could have also gone to college if they had offered to pay for it. That I could have also done grad school or lived without worrying about rent. That the only difference between their success and my situation was that they had everything on a silver platter and I had to scrape by from the bottom. My dad finally spoke and said that each situation was different, that they had made the decisions they thought were best at each moment. I asked him how it was possible that in my moment, the best thing had been to give me $7,000 and send me to work, while, for my siblings, the best thing had been to give them everything. He couldn't answer me. Or rather, he didn't want to answer me. I got up from the table, grabbed my things, and told them it was incredible how they could justify something so obviously unfair. Allison yelled something at me about being ungrateful. Justin muttered something I couldn't hear, and my parents just looked at me with that disappointed face, like as if I was the one being irrational. I left the house and walked to a park that was like 3 blocks away. I needed air. I needed to process what had just happened. I sat on a bench and stayed there, who knows how long, watching people pass by, some kids playing, trying to understand why I felt so angry but also so sad. Because part of me thought maybe I was exaggerating, that maybe $7,000 was a lot of money and I should be grateful. But another part of me, the stronger part, knew I wasn't crazy, that there was a huge difference and it was completely unfair. I spent the next few days like obsessed with this. I couldn't stop thinking about all the moments in my life where I'd felt like I was less important than my siblings. I started looking for evidence, as if I was building a legal case or something. I went through old emails, text messages, photos, whatever could prove the difference in how they treated me versus how they treated the others. I found an email from my dad to Allison where he told her they had transferred another $20,000 to her account so she and her husband could buy furniture for their new house. I found messages from my mom to Justin, asking him if he needed more money for I don't know what thing. I found photos of Ashley on a trip to Europe that my parents paid for as a graduation gift. I literally made a presentation, like with charts and everything. I felt kind of ridiculous making it, but I also felt it was necessary, that I needed to put everything in front of them in a way they couldn't ignore or minimize. I calculated approximately how much money they had spent on each of us. For Allison, Adding up the wedding, help with the house, money for her college, various gifts, I easily got to more than $200,000. For Justin, with the grad school, the rent, the expenses, plus what they'd given him before, also more than $100,000. For Ashley, with the student loans paid off, the trip, other things, another $80,000 or $90,000. And for me, $7,000. Ashley's birthday was like 2 weeks after the dinner where everything had exploded. My parents organized a dinner at their house, like a small event with just the family. They invited me, obviously, although things were tense. I don't know why I decided to go. Maybe because I wanted to confront them again, maybe because a part of me still hoped that somehow things would work out. I brought my laptop. During dinner, I was quiet, eating my food, responding with monosyllables when someone asked me something. When we finished eating and my mom was taking out the cake, I told them I had something to show them. My dad sighed, like already knowing there was going to be drama, but I told him to just give me 5 minutes. I took out my laptop and opened the presentation. I showed them everything, every number, every email, every transfer I could document. I showed them the charts comparing how much they had spent on each of us. I showed them that even if I took out Allison's wedding, because according to them it was a special event, there was still a difference of more than $100,000 between what they received and what I received. The silence at that table was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Seriously. Allison was looking at her plate. Justin had turned red. Ashley had tears in her eyes. My parents just stared at the screen without saying anything. Finally, my mom said something about how they had done the best they could, that they hadn't. Realized there was so much difference that it was never their intention to make me feel less. I asked them how it was possible they didn't realize, how it was possible they could spend $200,000 on a wedding and not think, even for a second, that maybe that was much more than they'd given me in my entire life. My dad got defensive and told me that each child has different needs, that they responded to what each one needed at their moment. I responded that the only reason I needed less was because they had decided my future wasn't worth as much as my siblings. That if they had offered to pay for my college, I would have needed that. That if they had offered to help me with rent while I started my career, I would have needed that. But they never offered me anything, so of course it seemed like I needed less. Justin tried to say something about how I had chosen not to go to college, and I exploded. I yelled at him that I didn't choose anything. That I assumed there was no option for me because they never offered it to me, because I saw how they paid for everything for Allison and thought nothing would be available for me, so I didn't even ask. I told him that maybe if I'd had even a quarter of the support he had, my life would be completely different now. My dad stood up from the table and told me that was enough, that I'd made my point, but it was time to let it go. He told me I could be happy with what they gave me, or I could continue, bitter and resentful. But that was my decision. He told me that if I couldn't accept that they had done things the way they thought was right, then maybe it was better if I didn't keep coming to these family gatherings. I stood there, looking at him, and I realized nothing was going to change. They were never going to admit they were wrong, never going to acknowledge the damage they'd done. I closed my laptop, told Ashley happy birthday because at the end it wasn't her fault, and I left. That was the last family dinner I went to. I stopped responding to messages, stopped going to gatherings. Basically, I completely distanced myself from my family. And I'm not going to lie, it was hard. Like the first few months, I felt kind of empty, like I'd lost something important, even though that something had been hurting me for years. I focused completely on my work. If they weren't going to give me the tools to succeed, then I was going to get them on my own. I worked like crazy, took extra projects, learned everything I could about construction, about project management, about business. I saved every penny I could, moved to an even cheaper place so I could save more money. Like 2 years after all that, I started my own construction business. I got my first contract, then another, then another. Things started growing faster than I expected, honestly. I hired my first employee, then a second. Now I have like 6 people working with me. It's not a giant company or anything, but it's mine. I built it, with my effort and without anyone's help. During all this time, I didn't hear anything from my family. No messages, No calls, nothing. I assumed they had simply decided I was the problem and had cut me out of their lives, which was fine, I guess. I mean, it hurt, obviously, but it was also like a confirmation that I'd been right all along, that they really didn't care. About 6 months ago, I got a call from my dad. I didn't answer. He left me a voicemail saying he needed to talk to me, that it was important to please call him back. I ignored it. He called me 2 more times that week. Then my mom sent me a text message saying they really needed to see me, that something had happened. Part of me was curious. I'm not going to lie. But another part thought it was probably some manipulation, like they wanted me to go to some family event and were using drama to make me feel guilty. Finally, like after 2 weeks of messages and calls, I agreed to see them. I told them we could meet at a cafe, neutral, public, where they couldn't make a scene. I arrived at the cafe and saw them waiting for me at a table in the back. They looked old, honestly, older than I remembered. My mom looked tired. My dad had more gray hair. I sat down and waited for them to start talking. I wasn't going to make things easy for them. My dad got straight to the point. He told me that Allison, Justin, and Ashley had stopped talking to them, that all three had basically cut contact, that they didn't invite them to anything, that they didn't even respond to their messages. He told me they were alone, that they had realized many things, that they had been wrong with me. My mom started crying, saying she was sorry, that they hadn't realized the damage they'd done until it was too late, that they understood why I had distanced myself and now the other three had too. She told me they were having money problems, that they had spent so much on my siblings that they hadn't saved enough for themselves. And now that they needed help, no one was there. I felt like a million things at the same time. Part of me felt satisfaction, like a vindication that in the end, the universe had done justice somehow. Another part felt pity because, at the end, they're my parents, and seeing them like this was sad. But the biggest part of me felt a kind of emptiness, like all this was too late, like any apology or acknowledgement didn't matter anymore. I asked my dad what they expected from me exactly. He was quiet for a moment and then admitted they hoped maybe I could help them, financially, because I was the only one who was still doing well, the only one who had built something stable. The irony was so obvious I almost laughed. The son they gave the least, the son who had to figure it out alone, was now the only one who could help them. I told them I would think about what they'd told me. I didn't promise them anything, didn't tell them yes or no. I just got up, paid for my coffee, and left. I haven't talked to them since then. That was like 3 months ago already. I don't know what I'm going to do. Honestly, there are days where I think I should help them a little. Not much, but something. Because at the end, they're my parents. But then I remember all those years feeling invisible, feeling like I wasn't worth as much as my siblings. And I think I don't owe them anything. Absolutely nothing. The ironic thing is that my siblings, the ones who received everything, the ones who had all the opportunities handed to them, were the ones who abandoned my parents when they were no longer useful to them. And me, the one who was ignored and belittled, I'm the only one they come to ask for help now. I don't know if that makes me a better person than them, or simply means I learned to be stronger because I had no choice. My family's story basically comes down to that, I guess. They favored 3 children, neglected the 4th, and in the end, the one they neglected was the only one who really built something lasting. I'm not saying what my siblings did is right, cutting off contact with my parents just like that. But I also can't judge them much, because I basically did the same thing years earlier. But the difference is, I had clear reasons, while they only distanced themselves when my parents could no longer give them more things. Now I'm here, with my business growing, with a life I built completely alone, without anyone's help, and I don't know if I should feel proud of that, or just sad that it had to be that way. I think it's both things, honestly. I'm proud of what I achieved, but there's also a part of me that will always wonder what my life would have been like if my parents had given me even half the support they gave my siblings. The other day I was at a construction site, reviewing some plans, and one of my employees asked me how I got started in this business. I told him the short version. Like I started working in construction when I was young, learned the trade, saved money, and eventually opened my own company. I didn't tell him about my family, about the $200,000 difference, about the awkward dinners and the presentations with charts. I didn't tell him that the reason I worked so hard was because I had no other choice, because no one was going to rescue me if I failed. He told me it was inspiring, that I'd built everything from scratch. And I guess he's right, although the cost of building from scratch was losing my family in the process. Or maybe I didn't lose them, maybe I never really had them in the first place, and it just took me 20-something years to realize that.